So to use our model here, what's happening whenever you recognize objects, whenever you look at the world, is that first you're receiving a lot of bottom-up information. Like I mentioned before, you're getting points of light, moving with edges, you're getting color information, luminance, various types of visual information. And at the same time, in order to parse all this information, you're having to use attention and experience. These top-down processes are having to play a role in sorting out all this incoming visual information. There's a lot of stuff on the screen, so when I point out that tin of paper clips, you have to be able to understand that you can focus on that specific location in space. And you have to use experience, you have to use memory to understand that this is itself a discrete object that's made up of a bunch of tiny little discrete objects inside the discrete object and so on and so forth. All right, so once you've combined these bottom-up and top-down processes, interpreted what's incoming visual information is there, then you have this kind of perception of discrete objects. And like I said, this is a very automatic process. We get this really easily, so we don't feel like we're actually doing anything when we look at an image like this. We do start to notice these things, however, when the information becomes more degraded, more ambiguous. So these are some classic illusions you've probably seen before. One on the left, I forget the name of that one, it's something like the old maid and the young maid and the old lady. So depending on how you interpret the information, you can see it as either a young woman looking over her right shoulder, and you can see that at her cheek there's a little bit of eyelash sticking out. Or you can interpret it as an old woman, where the young woman's cheek is one old woman's nose, the sort of choker on the young woman is now the old lady's mouth. Or you can see an ambiguous figure on the right here, this duck-rabbit illusion, where depending on how you choose to interpret the different pieces of this image, you can see it as either a bunny rabbit or as a duck. So illusions like this are really interesting to perceptual scientists like myself, because when these perceptions sort of lead us astray or break down, that's when we really start learning something about the visual system. So this is a classic illusion known as the table illusion. You've probably seen this before. It's just two tables. One looks really long, one looks kind of shorter and fatter. But if you trust that I'm not doing any magic with keynote animations, they're actually the same exact surface shape. Right. So the same thing is happening here as in that perceptual model I described. You're getting some bottom-up information. In this case, two identical shapes. Same exact shapes in physical space here, occupying the same area, same boundaries. But at the same time, you have your top-down processes acting on your interpretation of this information. You have experience with shapes in space. Right? If you see shapes, these two identical shapes being projected on your retina, it doesn't necessarily mean two identical shapes are out in the world in front of you. So because we're used to seeing things in depth, and the information in this image suggests to us that we're seeing an image in depth, we know that shapes tend to extend further in the sort of z dimension, and so we tend to stretch out the shapes in that dimension. So we tend to think the table on the left is extended along that length dimension. We tend to think the table on the right is extended in the width dimension, and we get two different shapes, even though, physically speaking, that bottom-up information is exactly the same. All right, so this next illustration I want to show you guys, I don't want to spoil this, I want to see how you guys react at first. There's something very strange happening in this image, besides the flickering. And when you notice what it is, I want you to just raise your hand. I'm just killing time this way. All right, so if you didn't catch it, the mountains in the background, if you pay attention to those. So you'll see that the mountains in the background are appearing and disappearing terribly. And this seems really weird, because we would think that if a mountain, a whole friggin' mountain, was appearing and disappearing right in front of our eyes, we would notice this. It's so obvious, so simple, right? So it's happening. So there it is, in case you can see it. Alright, so bottom-up information coming in is just, again, raw visual information that I kind of played a little trick on you here. It's kind of a weird situation in that you had that kind of flashing screen in the middle. And what that does is it induces a phenomenon known as change blindness, which is pretty self-explanatory, and was also the topic of my dissertation, so I can't help but put it in a giant top. So basically what's happening is that under normal circumstances, when I show you an image just like this, the only thing appearing and disappearing on the screen sort of creates this little flash. It's really easy for attention to pick up on that. In fact, there are theories that attention is actually grabbed by something flickering like that. And you notice the mountains right away. However, when I put that blank screen into place, instead of just those mountains being the things flickering, now the whole screen is flickering on and off. And because of that, you're forced to direct your attention around the scene. So this is the key top-down process that I'm exploiting here. And something I want to highlight is what this demonstration tells us is that even though we feel like we have a very rich representation of the world, that we're taking in everything all the time, and we can see everything around us in rich detail, that's just an illusion that your brain is playing on you. You can really only take in small bits of information and process them at a time. And that's what's happening in this demonstration. You're having to direct your attention around the scene and figure, okay, is that changing across the flash? Is that changing? No. Is that changing? No. Oh, the mountain's appearing, disappearing. Right. So the downside is I get to make you feel silly with little change marks, demonstrations like this. But the advantage to you every day is that you feel like you have a sensible interpretation of the world. You feel like you have this nice, consistent, detailed view of the world around you, even though if that's not necessarily true. But it makes for a nice conscious experience. So this brings us to the first important lesson here. So in summary, perception is inherently a process of interpretation. We often don't think of it that way. It doesn't always feel that way. But that's really what your brain is doing when you perceive the world. Second, a lot of stuff just escapes your awareness. We don't feel like it, but again, there's stuff happening in your head, there's stuff that could be happening out in the world, and you would have no idea any of that stuff is happening. You might not necessarily have ever thought of all the processes that are going into just opening your eyes and recognizing the world around you. So this all points to a sort of higher order point, which is that of metacognition. So metacognition is literally just cognition about cognition. Our ability to introspect on ourselves and understand how our own minds work. And what these examples tell us is that we're actually pretty poor at metacognition. We think we would notice mountains appearing and disappearing in front of us, but I put a simple little trick here that just involves a flashing screen, and you become completely blind to it. So the sort of more direct application to this principle is that it's really important for us to test any kind of Rift content that we develop. Just because you look at something and you go, oh, this looks great, it feels comfortable, it's awesome, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true for everybody else. All right. So, work up one down. This brings us to the second section, which is moving out into the bodily senses. So, when we talk about bodily senses, there are really two major systems we're talking about. The first is the vestibular system. This is composed of some organs inside your inner ear, the semicircular canals, and the otoliths. Not necessarily important here. What is important to know is that they detect acceleration. You might hear the vestibular system referred to as kind of your sense of balance. That's technically true. What it's doing is it's detecting the acceleration of gravity to tell you which way is down so you don't fall over like I did when I tried to get up on stage. What the vestibular system is doing is it's detecting accelerations that your head and hopefully your body attached to it are undergoing. So every time you undergo some kind of acceleration, you turn your head, you get moved, you undergo linear translation, your vestibular system kicks in and says something is happening. It's basically your body's accelerating. The second is the proprioceptive system. You might not have heard of this one. It's in kind of popular textbooks. It's basically your sense of your body's position. So it's sometimes related to the sense of touch. It's basically a system of receptors located inside your muscles and inside your joints that tell your brain and help it compute how your body is positioned at any moment in time. So my ability to close my eyes and know where my arms are, to touch my nose when I'm sober, is thanks to the proprioceptive system, because I know where all the parts of my body are and how they're positioned relative to each other. So the final point here that I wanted to highlight is this idea of multisensory integration. And we often talk about the senses as very separate things, and it becomes very easy to forget that when your mind is going through this process of perception, taking in this bottom-up information, applying top-down processes, coming up with an interpretation of your conscious experience, it's taking all your senses into account. And they can actually influence each other and interact in interesting ways. And unfortunately, we don't have time to get into this talk. All right, so one demonstration of kind of these systems in action is what's known as the vestibulo-ocular reflex, which I'm demonstrating in this very creepy video I made of my eyes. So that's the magic of VOR. Basically, VOR is your eye's targeting system. It's what lets you kind of lock your gaze onto something and move your head around and keep that sort of locked in place in your gaze. So basically what's happening here is that your vestibular system is taking in information about what kind of movements, what kind of accelerations, translations, rotations your body's doing, and it sends a signal to your eye muscles and tells them how to perfectly counteract that, or at least as well as they can counteract that motion. So what's interesting about VOR is that the bodily senses are what are driving your eye muscles. It's primarily serving vision, and vision does play some role in some correction of keeping your eyes locked on something. But for the most part, it's your bodily senses driving what your eyes are doing, even though this is primarily something subserving vision. And this has some interesting consequences. So, applying this to the Rift, it's really important that what gets displayed on the screen is updated properly with head movements. If, under normal circumstances, when I'm in the real world, if I want to keep my eyes locked on this microphone, I can move all around, I can turn my head, my eyes will stay locked on it, and that information always stays there. That visual information is always right in that spot, right in front of me. Because it's in the real world, it's physical world, it's not moving. But when you're in the Rift, you have a screen glued to your face, well, not literally glued, but you have a screen right in front of your face. And if I turn my head to the right, the screen is still in front of me. So now in order for the visual information in front of me to stay in front of me, I have to update the display to move it to the left. Or to the right, I guess. So that's all well and good in theory, but there are lots of ways this can go wrong. If you have bad distortion settings, if you have bad head modeling, I'll leave you to read more about these in the documentation if you don't already know about them. But they can cause rendering updates to basically occur incorrectly. Things won't move the way they should move in response to your head movements, and that's going to create some unusual experiences. This is the same reason why we recommend against just placing static images in front of people. You're not updating the image in any kind of way if you just place a static image in front of someone, and that can feel kind of weird. Other causes here, lost position tracking, judder, drop frames, latency, little things that we normally wouldn't think too much about can have a very big impact on your conscious experience of what's happening to you.